Okay, and so students with special needs. So these students require specially adapted instructional materials and practices to help them maximize their learning and achievement. So this can include kind of the curriculum itself. It could be part of the material. So maybe it's just they need a larger font because it's difficult for them to see. Um, all the way to the practices may be different, right? So if they need, then maybe they need more practice, maybe they need more time. And so you make these adjustments to help these students. Inclusion is the process where students who have special needs, right, they receive instruction in general education classrooms either for the entire day or for a portion of the day. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, right? So colloquially known as the IDEA Act. What it does is it provides education rights from birth until 21 for people with cognitive, emotional, or physical disabilities, along with kind of explaining and setting some of the standards. And part of that is the least restrictive environment. And that's part of the push for inclusion is following this law, but also it's providing these students with a quote unquote normal education experience. And it's providing their classmates with opportunities to get to know, see, and interact with people who have different needs than what they do. And so this is done well. This is a benefit to everybody. Um, and so students with special needs will have an individualized education program, so an IEP. And basically, this is tailored to their strengths and weaknesses to help them specifically develop. One common thing would just be assistive technology. So, electronic devices and other equipment that can enhance students' abilities and performance and can help them participate in the curriculum. So, this could be, um, as simple as like a translation device, right? Where they can type their ideas in their native language, it will translate it, and then they could read it to the group or to the class, right? So it's something that allows them to participate as they're learning the language. It could be that they have, you know, have a screen recording process so they can view back the lesson later. Um, any sort of assistive technology. Now, there is um, many approaches to kind of that are more like system level rather than just to the individual. One is response to intervention. So this is students who struggle with standard instruction and intensive follow-up small group instruction will receive additional support. So this is kind of um, a three-level system, right? We have what's kind of known as tier one instruction, which is just the normal classroom, the teacher's instruction. Follow-up small group is tier two, right? So they're pulled out. It's kind of like a tutoring-esque situation. And if they still struggle with that, then they'll be tier three, which is the most intensive level of support. And then positive behavior intervention and support is, you know, an approach that helps students um, do have more adaptive and appropriate behaviors. And then multi-tiered systems of support basically is kind of the standard because every school has a lot of stuff going on to help students. And so that's multiple interventions aimed to help learning and behavior issues or challenges. All right. So learning disabilities are having significant difficulties in one or more specific cognitive processes that can't be attributed to cultural or linguistic diversity. Um, so what I want to mention here is basically if you move to a country where you don't speak the language, That's not a learning disability, right? So that is a challenge or a difficulty that's brought on by not knowing the language and not necessarily knowing the local culture's rules. But that's not a disability. That's just a lack of knowledge, right? So for it to be a learning disability, it's not caused from diversity, essentially. Um, and so these are generally from delayed cognitive development, emotional problems, sensory impairment, or emotional deprivation. So here we have some of the more common um, learning disabilities: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? So these students will have, you know, significant and chronic challenges with inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Speech and communication disorders, so it's just impairments with spoken language or language comprehension, to the point to where it interferes negatively with academic performance. And then autism spectrum disorders. This is a extremely wide range of impairments in social cognition. So just understanding other people, social skills, language use, and social interaction. So these are some of the more common learning disabilities that you will encounter in your classrooms. Um, then intellectual disabilities, just students who have pronounced delays in most aspects of cognitive and social development. So emotional and behavioral disorders. So this manifests itself through kind of two categories of behavior: externalizing and internalizing. Externalizing behaviors are behaviors that primarily affect others. So this could be things like stealing, emotional outbursts, um, yelling, and things like that. Internalizing behaviors affect mostly the individual themselves. This could be things like anxiety, and depression. And so these behaviors, the behavior itself does not indicate that a student is emotionally, has an emotional and behavioral disorder, right? It's not every person goes through emotional outbursts. Every person feels anxious or can get depressed at some point in their lives. So it's not that these behaviors are indicate the disorder necessarily. It's an official diagnosis that goes through a process. All right, we have physical health impairments, visual impairments, and hearing loss. So, for visual impairments and hearing loss, the most common, right, is glasses or a hearing aid. However, for what would affect you as a teacher more would be if the visual impairments are significant and would require you to um, you like provide PowerPoints or materials that the student could view on their own computer magnified, or would require larger text printouts, and things like that. For hearing loss, you might need to record your lessons, and so the student could listen back at a volume where they're able to hear more effectively. Physical and health impairments. Um, It might be something where you need to make sure that your room and your layout is wheelchair friendly. So there's a lot of ways to make an inclusive classroom, and one of them, is just maximizing consistency of your classroom layout and schedule. This consistency, I've mentioned this in some variety on a lot of these videos, is consistency means predictability, which means students who might be anxious um, know what to expect so they can be calmer, um, things like that. So another is dual coding approaches. So um, I want to mention Alan Pivo's dual coding theory. So this, and again, I want to make a clean distinction between learning styles and dual coding theory. So, dual coding theory basically means we have an auditory and a visual processing, right? Verbal and nonverbal, essentially. And we can hear and listen. Sorry, we can hear and see at the same time while being able to actually take in that information at the same time. Um, and so what this does is it helps with our working memory. So our working memory has a limited capacity of, um, depending on how much you know, it's typically like 4 to 7, 8 items at a time. And so the dual coding helps with that. It helps with the integration into long-term memory. So in the classroom, what would this look like? It would be if you're having a diagram, like this diagram here of dual coding, it has some images and words that are together, right? So sometimes you'll see diagrams where there's the diagram here and there's a whole bunch of arrows, like a million arrows all over the place. That is not a good design. You, wherever possible, you want the image and the words to be together. And there is a helpful book, I believe it's called Dual Coding with Teachers. I'll try to include a little bit on that as well when I post the module. It's all about how to do diagrams as a teacher. Okay, and then if you also want to foster social cognition and interpersonal skills. So this is not as simple as you know, well, we're a social classroom, we have discussions, we have teamwork, we have this, we have that, we have that. So the kids will learn, their social cognition and interpersonal skills will improve, right? That's not always the case, right? We know that academically, students don't always learn in the classroom. And so what we want to do is to treat these skills the same way we treat academic skills, is we should teach them, we should model them. We should provide examples. And with social cognition and interpersonal skills, it's not that you would have like a whole lesson on social cognition, and helping people understand other perspectives or on how to resolve disagreements, but you might have mini lessons that you plan, or it might just be there's a teachable moment that comes up and you provide a mini lesson. And so this brought compared with the kind of diverse approaches in the classroom. So like group work, individual work, um, maybe a couple competitions, lecture, things like that. You intentionally embed um, those opportunities in your classroom, and you intentionally draw students' attention to, okay, so when you are sharing your perspective, some of you will disagree. That's okay, but I want you to work to understand, why do you disagree? What does the other person think? If you just little phrases like that built into your teaching will help foster these things. And with that, we need to prioritize gradual improvement, because these changes aren't just going to happen overnight, right? It's not so simple as, oh, as a teacher, I was doing something wrong, my structure was off or my rhythm was off. That's why there were these challenges. Um, like it's not so simple as you fixing yourself means the class is going to go great, right? Students are where they're at. You are where you're at. You can work to improve. Your students can work to improve, and you can have your environment be set up to help them improve. Okay. And one thing with this is pointing out progress, right? Because a lot of times the progress is slow, and so students might not see it. So if you can be aware and then you can compliment your students for the progress that they've made, that will help them as well. And then this last one is including vocational and life skills in the curriculum. So I've kind of mentioned this, but being representative and including these things. So don't only talk about like, oh, in college, or don't only talk about engineering or being a doctor or a nurse. Like those are all great, but in the curriculum too, you should seek to include, where you can, where it fits, things about like electricians, mechanics, small businesses, you know, things like that, where it's not just oriented towards one type of student.